All right, so this Knife Thoughts video is going to be a review of this knife, and this is the Spyderco Pits, or Pie in the Sky. And first of all, I got this knife from Knife Ship Free. I did purchase this knife, but I am an affiliate of Knife Ship Free, so although this knife is sold out there and pretty much everywhere else, unfortunately, if you decide to get any other cool Spyderco sprint runs or really any type of knife, definitely check out the link in the description. Which is an affiliate link. Helps support the channel to if you go and buy a knife through that link at Knife Ship Free. Plus, Knife Ship Free is just a really great dealer. Jay, who runs it, is really cool and always really helpful, so I definitely suggest it. But I did purchase this knife, so it wasn't sent to me for review or anything like that. I purchased it, although I did use some rewards points, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But what is this? So, like I said, this is a sprint run, and I will show you the insert that came with the box. So, it comes in a normal Spyderco box. You can see that it's made in Italy, titanium and M390. So, also has a little sticker in there, but more importantly, here is the insert. So as you can see, a sprint run is a special production run of a knife not found in the regular production line. Now the Pits was a regular knife in Spyderco's line, and when it was, I kept meaning to get one. It just kind of drug my feet and didn't get one. But I always kind of wished that I had, and so I was excited when I saw that they were doing a sprint run of this knife. Now, what's interesting about this knife, and it says once it is sold out, it will not be produced again in the exact form. So they do lots and lots of sprint runs of like the Paramilitary 2 and stuff like that, just not the exact same. But what's interesting about this is that it is actually a non-locking, or what I would call a slip joint knife, but it has a look and a design that is very much like most modern one-hand opening locking knives. It looks like a Spyderco knife, despite it being non-locking. And then it has a really cool version of a slip joint. It's not integral in the way that some people use, the term integral for knives, where the handle is made out of one piece, but the back spring that actually holds the blade open and closed is integral to each handle scale. So I'll show you how that works once I get to the knife itself. But they are precision machined from solid titanium and skeletonized. So it's a pretty cool, way of making a knife. Not something that I've seen really anywhere else. I feel like maybe there are a few like custom type makers that do things like this, but I haven't seen any other production knives. I'm sure someone will correct me and say that there are, but this is kind of the only one that I am familiar with. Now it also has M390, which if I remember correctly is different than the normal run of these was. So a really good still also. But let's get into the knife itself. So you can see here, and I have been using this knife, so there's kind of some stuff on the blade, but don't mind that. But there is the designer's mark, Mike Reed, and Mr. Reed is a British knife maker, and Britain, the UK, has some really ridiculous, I don't mind saying that because it's true. I try not to be political at all on my channel here, but I don't think it's political, I think it's moral, that the knife laws in the UK are nonsensical. But basically you can't have a locking knife, and so I don't know all of the details of the rules, but this knife, or the custom version of this, was designed to be legal to carry in the UK. And so it is a slip joint. It's a non-locking knife, but it's also a one-hand opening knife. So, like I said, it really looks to me like a normal, kind of modern, one-hand opening locking knife. You can see that it shares some similarities to the Spyderco Native. It also is similar to some other Spyderco knives, like the Tenacious, and kind of in the handle shape, and just kind of a general mashup of a lot of different models from Spyderco. But it has that non-locking nature. So one thing to be aware of with that I think a lot of people who are not familiar with slip joints is that it makes it a little more difficult to open. So it's not going to be quite as smooth and easy to open as even a backlock. And some people these days complain about backlocks because there is constant pressure on the tang when you're opening the knife due to the spring pushing the lock bar against the tang. Now, I certainly, don't think that that's an issue with a backlock, but the pits, being a non-locking knife, will certainly have more resistance to opening than a knife that has a lock like the Axis lock or a frame or liner lock like this Axial NZ. So it definitely is a little bit more difficult to open and close because it does have to overcome that spring pressure. But I have found personally that it's not, something where I'm unable to open it. I can open it quickly and consistently with one hand without any trouble, and it just took honestly a few minutes, maybe an hour of getting used to the angle that you have to do it at. You do have to get some pressure down into that hole because there's not the access to the whole opening hole. So you can see, as compared to the Native 5, there's a little bit less access on the pits than to the opening hole than on the Native. Not a whole lot less, and the hole is bigger, but just a little less, and because it is a knife with a back spring, you have to get some purchase in there. So you get some purchase, and then it's not difficult to open for me. Now, one cool thing about this type of slip joint, or non-locking knife, is that you actually get some extra security because it is this integral spring. And so I'll show you that real quick. You can see that this spring is actually cut out or machined out of the handle scales on each side, and then there's a bar that connects the two, and that is what applies the pressure on the tang, which you can see in there, to hold the knife open and closed. But because that's exposed, when you hold down on this knife like this, you're actually putting additional pressure onto this back spring to hold this blade open just a little bit more strongly. Now, is this a tactical knife? Is it even really a hard use knife? I would say not as much as some others, but I think pretty much all normal use, as well as most outdoor use like hunting, camping, this knife will hold itself open and closed more than securely enough. Definitely, don't think that there's any issue there. And then on top of having that added security because of the exposed back spring, there's a pretty extended finger guard here. So you can see even, as long as you're holding the knife with your finger kind of at the end of the handle here or the front of the handle, if the knife starts to close, that guard is going to hit your finger. So your finger would have to open up quite a bit, for that blade to continue to close while your hand was there. Now, one thing that I actually would change about this knife is I would probably make that a little smaller. I think it's a little bit bigger than it needs to be completely honest. I use slip joint knives almost as often as locking knives and don't really have any issue with them closing. So while I think that it's added to really give some extra security, or at least feel of security, I do wish that when the knife was closed, this finger guard didn't stick out. It looks like a flipper, and I actually have shown this to some other people who appreciate knives, and they think it's a flipper, but it is definitely not a flipper. There's no way you could, I say that, and I'm sure somebody might be like, well, if you swing it hard enough, but there's basically no way that you could ever use this like a flipper. There's just too much pressure, and there's no detent, basically. There is actually a little kind of extra safety to the opening that pushes the blade the whole way closed there. But there's no way you can use this as a flipper, so I do wish that it was a little shorter. So if you look at how much sticks out from the handle there, you would have to take a little bit off there. But again, I think even if you didn't have quite as much, so maybe cut it straight off from that unsharpened area, I think that it would still be safe enough. So I do wish that the hand or the finger guard was not quite as extended. I think it's a little bit over the top. Now moving on to but before we get to the blade, the handle itself is actually super comfortable. So I have pretty wide hands, not super long fingers or anything, but wide fingers and hands, kind of fat hands, I guess. And I was a little bit nervous that it would not be big enough for my hand, but it definitely is. I can get all 4 fingers very comfortably on this knife, and it feels great in the hand. I've used this a good bit since getting it, and I feel like this is a really, really comfortable handle. It's a nice, simple handle. Some curves to it, but pretty simple. And so, you know, a simple handle makes for an ergonomic handle, and I'm really happy with the ergonomics of this knife. Speaking of that, the clip is a wire clip. Now, I do believe that this is steel, whereas the handles are titanium, because it is magnetic. So here is a Skill Hunt M150, a flashlight that I really like. Has a magnetic tail, and it is, you know, magnetized to that clip. I don't know, to be completely honest, if the screws are titanium or steel. I would imagine steel. Yeah, it feels like they are steel. But you know, it's not a huge deal to me. This is definitely not a knife that is designed to be, you know, taken into non-permissive environments or whatever. The titanium is just to allow for the integral back spring and also to be cool, because titanium handled knives are cool, right? But it's a very comfortable handle, and this wire clip is a great choice. I do like Spyderco's wire clip, and I think that it is pretty ergonomic. It doesn't add any real hot spots or anything like that. So I'm a fan of the wire clip, and the handle feels great in use. I also think it just looks good. A lot of people that I've shown this to have agreed that with all of this milling, it's just a good looking knife. Now, one interesting thing with the handle is that it does have a G10 backspacer. And I actually think that that's a good call. I've thought about this a lot because it would be nice if this was 100% metal. It's always just cool for a knife to be 100% metal. Again, I'll show you the axial knives Enzy. You can see that it has a titanium back spring. And it does, you know, make for a very uniform look. But one thing that I have seen complaints of or reports of is blade wrap. So blade wrap is when the spring pressure of the knife closing the blade makes it over travel downward and the edge hit either the spring or, you know, the backspacer or whatever. I have seen some complaints of blade wrap on these Pitts knives against this area here. But with it being G10 on this sprint run version, it's very unlikely that it's going to actually cause any edge damage. So M390, you know, Spyderco usually does a great job of their heat treat. Well heat treated M390 hitting G10, you're not going to notice any damage from that. So I do think practically it is a good choice, while aesthetically it might not be the ideal choice. Another thing that I've seen complaints of is bad or issues with the milling on the inside here with this cutout for the back spring. Mine does not have that at all. Basically just some kind of leftovers and tooling marks, and mine has none of that. Very nicely done. Great machining on mine. So mine doesn't have any of the issues that I've seen people complain of, and even if it did have blade wrap, I think it wouldn't be a huge deal with this G10 backspacer. But finally, moving on to the blade. Really classic blade shape, kind of a long clip point. Again, something that Spyderco has used before, like on the, Tenacious. And it has a full flat grind, which comes to a nice thin edge. Like I said, I've used this a good bit, and it cuts really well, which is something that you know, have come to expect from Spyderco. So you can expect it to cut pretty much like a Spyderco would. Now, you notice that it is not sharpened or even ground all the way to the kind of finger guard here. I don't really know what the reasoning for that is. So it's definitely not a choil. It's not like to choke up. And I just can't see any reason why it would need to, you know, not be sharpened or ground farther down. I mean, maybe there's some sort of reasoning with not wanting to sharpen it all the way up into the Spyderco hole or spider hole. I don't know, but I do wish that it was sharpened farther. In fact, I think that that's, you know, the one thing that I think this area right here on the knife is where it really lacks. I do wish that this was shorter, like I said earlier, and I can't see why you couldn't add another, you know, 1/4 inch. The blade is already going to count as this full length. It's not like, you know, most places don't consider the edge length as the blade length. They consider from the end of the handle to the tip. So if you know, you might as well bring that grind all the way down, or farther down at least than it is. I just don't see a great reason for that grind to be so far forward. Maybe it's an aesthetic thing that the designer does, the maker that makes the custom version of this. I don't know. I've never seen his work, to be completely honest, besides the pits. But I do wish that it was ground farther down. And, you know, the primary grind and, of course, the secondary grind, the edge. Now, one nice thing about this knife is that it's made in Maniago, Italy. So one of the places that Spyderco has their knives made, of course, as well as Colorado, USA, Taiwan, and then China. And I think it's cool that it's made in Italy. There is a tradition of slip joints being made in Italy. It seems like Spyderco you know, has had other slip joints made in Italy, and so I appreciate that. Certainly Spyderco's Taiwan factory does a great job, but I do think that it is nice to see this made in Italy. Now I want to give you some quick size comparisons. I already showed both of these knives, but I just want to show them, you know, actually side by side. Here is the pits with a Spyderco Native 5. You can see the pits is longer. The blade is not a whole lot longer, but the handle is longer. And then here is a full-size Benchmade Griptilian, good bit bigger for sure, but just a good comparison of some classic EDC knives. So I think that the pits is a great size. It's a very EDC friendly size in my opinion. You know, I do tend to carry larger modern knives, but I think that it is a great size for EDC. Now, I mentioned earlier that I used some rewards points to get this knife. So this knife costs normally $280 from most dealers, at least from Knives Ship Free. And, you know, $280 is squarely above my normal price range. I really just don't buy knives in that price range very often. But I buy a lot of knives from Knives Ship Free, or I guess a good number. And so I had some rewards points, was able to get about $72 off. So I paid $208 for this knife. That's still actually a little bit above my normal price range. I just can't buy a whole lot of knives in that price range. But I think at that price, you're getting a pretty great deal with the full titanium handles, the M390 steel, the fact that it is a sprint run, it's made in Italy. I think that it's a good value at that price. At $280, I think even there for a lot of people it will be a good value, but for me that's just a little bit out of my normal price range, as I said. So I'm happy with this knife at the price that I paid. I think it's really cool, really unique. One last thing I forgot to mention is that because this wire clip can move a good bit, so especially when you're opening it, this is going to be really hard to show, but when you're opening it, I find it that my fingers kind of pull on the wire clip. It does create some scratching, and it actually came with a little kind of insert thing there to stop it from having scratching from the factory. So you will get some scratching there from the clip. But I think it's a really cool knife, really unique knife, one that I'm happy to have gotten. These did sell out really quickly, so unfortunately, I think at this point you'd probably have to get it from the secondary market. But really unique, cool knife to add into the carry rotation, and happy to have gotten it. So again, thanks to Knives Ship Free for always giving great service. Definitely check them out using the link in the description. Check out my social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Knife Thoughts, and my website, knifethoughts.com, where I post articles on knives like this and knife-related topics. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and select all so you know when I post new videos. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.